glad to be with you guys. And so we're talking about blending families, and we're going to talk about, as Pastor Steve mentioned, we both come from a background where we were in ministry full-time in different parts of the world, doing all kinds of different things. And both of us, our spouses, made decisions that were just bizarre at the moment. I mean, I've never gone through a divorce. Nobody in my family had ever gone through a divorce in my lifetime. So I knew God hated it, but when you go through one, you know why. Because it's a violent tearing apart of something that shouldn't be. And you experience that, and everybody experiences it, and it's just a lot of pain and fallout. And so I knew I needed a lot of support. So when I came back to, I was in Hawaii at the time, came back to the States, was able to connect with Jamie, who was also living in a similar situation, married to a minister that made some interesting choices too, and we ended up kind of just having these parallel stories, and God had put us together. Now, you've never heard us say that. We've never talked about this at all, and there's a reason though. There's a reason, because we are firm believers, and I said it last time, that the grass is greener where you water it. And I would not, and I know you would not recommend just, things getting difficult, just going, hey, it'd be brighter someplace else. But what God has done is amazing between us. And I'm seriously blessed to have remained faithful during that time and seen what God has done, the stability in the family we have now. And we just celebrated our 13th year. So it's been a long time, and we've just, we came back here, and when we came to this area, we immediately came to meet with Pastor Steve and said, we know this is where we need to be. And so when we came to Virginia Beach, we met, and I told Pastor Steve my story. I don't know if you remember this, and went through the story a little bit and kind of got into just the details. And he was like, if you ever reach back out to that woman, I will punch you in the face. So, exact quote. That's a true story. It's exact quote. That's an exact quote about, look, you don't need to you just let God kind of be in charge of this and stop trying to do it yourself and see what God will do. So we were blessed though.
Yeah, I would just add to that and I didn't know we were going to do this story, but we are. So, okay, no, but that it wasn't like a jumping of ships in the marriages. It can sound like that when the chapters come close together, and that's not at all. We didn't know each other at all during the times of when we had different spouses.
Yeah.
So we were not in each other's lives in any regard. So I just want to make that really clear. This wasn't a jumping of ships or a choice in a marriage choice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the fallout there too, of many of you've experienced, I don't know all of your stories, but it was a very weird season for me, because I just finished my second book, and I'd done some book touring, and then I was a teaching pastor at a church of 18,000 people. And, pretty much living the dream, like really just, they just going to the beach when I wanted, and you're in Hawaii, and literally went from there to like living in my parents' back bedroom. And so like, that's a devastation of identity, realize how much it impacts different things. Those of you who've been through it, I'm preaching to the choir. The pain is just tremendous, and it just ripple effect. And, we've been able to somehow kind of really walk this and surround ourselves with some very strong leaders, like Pastor Steve and Sharon have been instrumental. And so have you, Josh. Thank you. And just been really, having that has been just a big difference. And, we kind of navigated some really tough things. So we always talk about, we train people in counseling. We teach at Regent. And it's important just for you to know, we normally make sure people don't speak from their hat on of personal experience. This experience, you're going through something hard, your friends try to give you advice, and they're like, man, you need to dump that guy and take him to court and do everything you can. And you're like, what? Like, that's not, because that's what their personal body of knowledge is. So we're going to talk to you today from our clinical body of knowledge, because we've done a lot of research, and I walk with a lot of couples through this in blending families and divorce as well. And we want to talk about that from that body of knowledge, and also we have enough self-awareness to realize our personal body of knowledge and biases may get into the room as well, which you'll be aware of probably before we are. But But I want to get into a little bit. Nobody goes into a relationship with without good intentions, but it takes certain actions and behaviors to maintain and sustain a marriage, and it can be very, very challenging and difficult, especially in our culture. But I've read some statistics, and I want to kind of shoot down. We're going to talk about some actual numbers real quick, but the divorce rate in America has been said to be 50% of first marriages, 67% of second marriages, and 73% of third marriages fail. That's actually untrue. None of that's based on any data. So there's no actual numbers behind that or data. So I don't know where that's been going around. It's in Psychology Today and a bunch of other neat places, but just there simply isn't true. So we're going to talk about the actual numbers, what kind of goes on a little bit, and not from a perspective you need to know about that as much. We're going to pepper this with a lot of pro tips and different things you can do to kind of counteract a lot of things going on. So we'll get moving with it. But, there's a lot of names for step families, though. I don't prefer blended families. It's just not I don't like that. I prefer stir-fry families, but it never took off. Because, stir-fry, each flavor retains itself. I would prefer, but I talk about it at conferences and whatnot, and they boo me out of the room. So I don't know. It's not going to be where I make my mark, I don't think. But it's really that kind of a thing where it's a very unique thing. And I think that the hard thing is taking advice from other people. It's really tough because they're all talking from their own place of hurt, their own place of experience, and it can be really challenging to really get that objective look at things, which I'm going to show you how to do today a little bit. But I can tell you this, that traditional families are no longer in the norm. 65% of families in America are non-traditional. It could be blended, it could be single-parent homes or any of those things, but 65% are not in the traditional model, which should be ideal. And so, again, a lot of different things. In fact, 1/3 of all marriages, wedding ceremonies are blended families. So, again, you're looking at a significant amount of marriages. Now, it's interesting because, when you talk about preparation for those things, 50% of couples in their first marriage get any kind of premarital preparation, right? They just don't. 50% come for some kind of preparation and training. And in a first marriage, you get to go home and you spend X number of months or years just growing together, learning each other. In a second marriage, it goes to about 75% do not pursue any kind of preparation. And so it's a little under that. It's about 24% do. 50% will read a book on it, roughly. But again, there's even less training, yet they have 3 times the level of stress. And when they come back, then they're dealing with kids, how they're handling it, all kinds of different emotions, triggers, other parents that are not involved in their home, and all of this, and they don't really get the chance to gel as a couple as much. And so it's very, very tricky. We can tell you that clinically and from personal experience, it is hard. But there's just not a lot of data on divorce rates with blending families, believe it or not. So, but again, that's not really the point of what we want to do, because the thing with this is that a blended family generally begins with an end. And so there's generally something is ended, and then it begins from there. It could be a death, it could be a suicide, could be a divorce, it could be something, but something has happened and something has ended. And with those ends often comes a loss.
I would say every time there is a loss, there's very few instances in my mind that I can imagine that there's not a loss, and especially in this scenario, it's a complete, and it's not even a trajectory change. It's a complete loss. It is the death of a dream. Mm-hmm. So everybody who ever has been married at all, and at once, twice, wherever you are in that number, if you've ever been married, you have a dream. There is a dream. If you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, fiance, you have a dream. So there is definitely a loss. Then add a family on top of that. And now you're talking about a devastational loss. Yeah,
it can be really hard. You have a hope, and then you can kind of spiral on a lot of different things, and it makes it very, very difficult. And with every loss, there's grieving. And so when you're grieving and you're trying to heal, it can make a big difference. Because if you connect too quickly to get the effect of being in love and connecting again and feeling lovable and all these different things, if you connect too quickly at those moments, what you end up in is bleeding onto the new relationship from the old relationship, and you're really not in that place. In fact, some couples often they'll get to a place where they're doing better after they marry, and then they're like, "Why do I have this person? We're not compatible here, and whatever." Because at the time it was like Novocaine, and then then now they get down the road and they're not really ready to connect. And so those things can kind of happen. I do want to touch on this though, because it's kind of something I've dealt with a lot with. If you're blending family built on an affair, beware. That is the foundation of infidelity, a foundation of cheating in any way like that. It's and come together and go, well, this is really the person I want to be with. You really need to seek some professional help with that, because there's going to be some pretty big problems with that. Two of the stages of love are about developing trust, and when you initiate a relationship with violating trust, eventually you turn around and say, well, when am I not going to look good enough for them to stay here? Or when are they going to decide to do, at what point do they go do that again? And so there's this level of distrust. It can be worked through. But everything I mentioned today, I've worked with people through. So I've had no blended families get divorced I've worked with. But again, knock on wood. But again, there's some things you can do that can be really helpful. But again, those are things to pay attention to.
Absolutely, and I'd say it's also something it's a lot of work, and then if your relationship is built on a justification, the foundation is built on a justification, a justification of value, of principles, of biblical principles. There is that right there. You're going to have to strip the relationship down to the foundation to rebuild that. If you don't think that's painful, it is. It's most definitely. I've seen it too many times to say that it's not painful. To watch that happen is not as painful as a divorce, but very, very painful for people to walk through, and a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of commitment. So I just add to that.
And yeah, it's a tough thing. If you've been through it, you already know what I'm talking about. But it is something that is very hard to deal with when you're the one who wants the marriage to remain, and that makes it pretty difficult when you realize you can't make somebody stay married to you. So it can be really difficult there. But it's really all about, in divorce is really a process. It's not really a moment or a paper. It's a growing apart. It's little wedges of resentment that go in there, and then losing affection, not pursuing affection, all the things we talked about last time I was here. You start thinking, well, why am I with this person? I shouldn't be, and you start, in your mind, seeing all those differences and no longer focusing on what has brought you together, and it can start to really make a wedge. And which is good news, because you can interrupt that process. And so there's a lot you can do, but it's kind of a process that leads up to it. And I would also say separation. Some people talk about separation as well. Let's get some time apart. And separation is helpful in physical abuse and things like that. But other than that, it is not. You remove the stressor from the relationship, and you think, wow, it feels good to breathe like this. And then it's like, okay, well, let's get back together. And you're like, now I got to climb Mount St. Difficulty in order to get back together, and I'm enjoying where I'm at. And other relationships that are easy look really good until they're not. And so, but just beware. A lot of people think, well, this will help a lot, and makes a difference. Let's talk about kids a little bit though. Children, talk about blending and divorces in general. The children who have the hardest time with divorce are ones who didn't see it coming. So when people have a good relationship, they're functioning well, and all of a sudden one partner is like, I don't want to do this anymore. The kids are devastated by that, because they don't have any kind of reference of why this happens. Keep in mind, everything we do, we teach kids what we know, but we train them by how we live. They're watching us. Now, you may think that's bad news. It's great news if they don't listen to you. So if they don't listen to you, do the right things in front of them. Just live in front of them and trust God to do the rest. But when you're doing that and you're just training them, they see, they learn. My kids know how to treat a woman by how I've treated Jamie. And even in the blended family, they had the opportunity to see that. They get a chance to see how to work through difficulty when things aren't good, when things aren't fun. How do we work through it? And we still get together, and we still come back together, and we're still here. So they learn that people don't just leave. So there's all these, the narrative is changed by what we've been able to do together. And that's something that you guys have the opportunity to do no matter where you are in whatever you're in your relationships. But again, that is the most difficult. And it's not as important who has much time, whether dad's got equal time. In Virginia law, it's pretty much stated that fathers and mothers get 50-50 custody unless there's a significant reason not to. So that's the way the Code of Virginia has been amended over the last few years. However, statistically and through research is telling us that What's most important is how well mom and dad get along, not how much time they have. If the time they come together is contemptuous and is difficult and is high conflict, then co-parenting is more damaging. So the point of this is people come to me all the time and say, we're just talking about divorce and stuff. I said, well, you don't have to work on your marriage if you don't want to, but your communication and the way you treat each other will change. That's not an option, because you're either going to have to do the business of co-parenting together and you're going to need to not damage your children, or you can stay married and not damage your children and work on that. But either way, if you come in here thinking, well, I'm just going to cut and run, that's not an option. Your option is to learn how to work and learn how to function. You guys are together in the raising of that child, and you're going to learn how to do it in a healthy way. That's what I'm there to tell them. So it's not that easy of just kind of in those areas where some people think, well, if I just leave, it'll be fine, and the time, and I'll just. It really takes that extra effort and to really make sure the kids are good. But again, that's a big difference too. Just kind of how to do that. But just really take that active role in the process. That's really the biggest thing. But we can't give remote control of our emotions to other people. It's kind of like, you can't just hand it to your ex spouse and say, just push the buttons and I'm just going to jump whenever you do. You can't. We always say, we love saying this to our patients, you can't ride all the rides in the park. You can't emotionally. You have to stick to your values and not be reactive. You got to say, this is the person I want to be. This is the person my family needs, no matter what decisions anybody else has made. And I'm not going to react and respond to everything the other person does. And so, no matter what, I don't care how loving they are, if they're human, there's times that they can push those buttons in the wrong ways. You're just
that's
like your
marriage, no matter what.
Yeah.
That's relationship, no matter what.
No matter what, you have to realize, okay, look, they're not perfect, and we live in a fallen world. We just have to navigate it the best we can, and that's just the challenge of it. But again, that's the big difference here. You got to work on those things. So let's talk about your friends real quick, because there's some emerging research on this. And it's not the kind of friends Pastor Steve talked about with gossip necessarily Sunday morning, but a little bit different type of friends. So your social network and the way you connect with people. Parents who perceive in some way that their friends disapprove of the relationship have more high conflict. Thus, their kids don't adjust as well. They have lower academic performance. They have more behavioral problems, and they have attachment issues. So that remote control, if you're handing it to social media and social media is dictating how well your kids have a future, you need to take a look at that. So perceived social network, if friends perceive forgiveness of the other partner's wrongdoings as not appropriate or frowned upon, it has a dramatic decrease in whether people forgive or not. So the voices around us have really strong power in these type of matters that really don't belong in their hands. And so we just have to realize that, we have to decide. We have to make some decisions. You can't decide what happens to you in a lot of situations and in relationships, but you can decide what comes in the next chapter with you. And that's something you have the power to do and say, you know what, I'm not going to bring this pain and this hurt into this. So we have to kind of remember what the Word of God tells us, and we do these things and we act obediently in ways where we're following what God says to do in relationships instead of what our flesh wants to do. You have to remember every act of obedience that we do takes us one step closer to that miracle we're really pursuing. Every little act of obedience brings you closer. You may not have another person in your life and may have gone through a divorce, and you're thinking, you know what, every act of obedience to be closer to God will bring you closer to being able to be the person in someone's life and be ready for that person. So every small decision matters. And, and so, 1 Peter 1:22 says, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility. It's intentional. We have to do it. It's not natural. You're not going to default to it. It's not the way it is. We have to make that intentional effort to put that on in situations where there's not necessarily value, some value in it for what we want.
But it's really a commitment to the outcome, because you have to have the vision of the outcome. And where is this marriage going to be, and where is it going to be in a year from now? It's that strategic planning, and not just for today, not just for this morning when I'm waking up and irritated,
Yeah.
or when I went to bed irritated.
Right.
And yes, of course, that never has happened. But like, it's not for that. It's for the vision. It's the vision of the future. And it's the vision for your children's future.
Right.
And so, and that's really the one that will, for me, that will realign me almost every single time to my values. And it's realignment to your values that will help you make those right decisions, even when your emotions don't align, because emotions are not facts. They're just emotions.
They're just emotions. They're not the truth. I hate to tell you this. Emotions are energy in motion. Emotion. That's what it is. It is your physiology in your body doing things. It is not the guiding force for your life, which is where it can be challenging. And I didn't put a question in here for Pastor Steve, but I wouldn't mind if he answered, how to navigate that. The verse that says about being peaceable in our heart and following the peace and whatever, if it's peaceable above all, because people often confuse peace with their emotions, and it's
Happiness.
it can be hard to distinguish the two, and so it can be really, really tough to make decisions based on that, And I think you've said it before numerous times. And I've had to tell myself many times, you got to go back to the Word of God. The Word of God first is where you go first to try to get that guidance, and that is the easy, black and white, clear answer 100% of the time. So, but yeah, we got to pay attention to our friends, what voices are speaking into it. And again, this is not a negative. All this means is you got to find people in your life that can mentor you and lead you. If you want to be a world-class guitar player, and you decide, I'm going to call John Mayer until I figure out how to get a hold of him. And he's like, come on over, I'll teach you. And you spend 6 months with him, you will play the guitar better than if I go down to X guitar store and go in a cubicle with somebody for 20 minutes. It's going to be a different outcome. Amen. So if you want that kind of marriage, if you view your marriage, like Jamie said, in that way, the vision of your marriage, find uncommon mentors. Don't find common people to be around with that just validate how you feel and you have every right to hurt. You do. You have every right to hold on to your hurt. You 100% honestly do. And you will have the consequence of that because you're the only one who can let go of it. Nobody can undo what they did. So we have to let go. And we have to let go over and over and over and over, or we're going to carry it into the next chapter, And she's worth more, and her family's worth more, and her kids are worth more than my hurt bleeding over into it. And so that's where you have to kind of prepare yourself.
I would say some practical things that we've learned in that. I'm just going to give a 1 second practical thing that we learned early on was when we recognize this, and I'm not saying every single time that not when you're irritated, but when we recognize that it was the other person's stuff, right? That that is objectively not me, or this is objectively, not him. Then, and yet maybe that person has a blind spot, then there's a soft way to approach, but we also would just say, that's not mine. That's not mine. And just kind of identify that in our relationship when we're not heated or irritated. Yeah. But be able to identify that so that there is a little bit of introspection, and we still will do that. But we've got a little bit faster with it, so it's like, not mine. So we can kind of do that, but we have the foundation to be able to go, not mine. And said with love.
Those triggers we get from the losses, there are triggers. And so it's very easy to go, when somebody else is triggering us, to say, don't do that. Where we have to realize what's ours. The way we kind of subscribe to the idea of there are me problems, there's me problems, her problems, and we problems. And if it's a me problem, if it's my trigger, I need to handle my stuff. And I don't need to take it into the we. I don't need to put extra tension and weight on a difficult situation in a blending situation in order to, try to work it out. I mean, there's certain times she can help me with certain things, but overall, I have to manage me. And she has to handle her in certain situations.
Well, I have to handle me so it doesn't become we as well, because that just is a whole different chaotic mess.
Yeah, it can turn into something far, far different. So that's one of the things I wanted to say as a pro tip. Don't internalize too much. People are going through things, they react, they say things, they're hurting. It's so easy to internalize it and make it a narrative about yourself. There's probably a 15% chance it's actually about you. And there's an 85% chance it's about wherever they are in the moment and what they have going on. And so don't make that narrative about yourself and and really stay in there. Try to be not reactive to things and try to understand where they're coming from, what's going on today, what have they been going through. These things make a huge difference. And also keep in mind, children will lash out where they're safest. So when you have kids in a setting like this, and they go to visit another parent, or they may get every other weekend with dad, they come back and they're just horrible when they come back. And you're like, every time they come back from his house, well, they're reminded of the time they're missing him. They reminded of the separation. They're reminded of the pain, but they don't lash out in the relationship that they're frustrated with because they only have a couple hours with him. And they're going to come back where it's safest and lash out. So they know they can vent and let go of that frustration in an environment that is safer. So don't internalize that of how bad that is. That they're actually trying to process what they're feeling that's very complicated in the safest place.
And as children, you have to remember there's many developmental stages, and we can go through them, but we're not going to today. You're welcome. But what we do have to remember is your brain. I love this. I say it all the time. Your brain's not fully formed until you're about 26 years old. Some of y'all's brains aren't even fully formed yet. So that's kind of cool because you're having children. But but with that is your child that is trying to navigate this relationship that is not ideal. It is not what is meant to be. Doesn't have the same adult capacity that you do to navigate it, and you actually understand the why better. Even if you don't know the why, you understand it better than they do. Yeah. So they don't have the ability to even create those pathways because that's not the way it's supposed to be, and they innately know that. So they're coming back and lashing out in the safe environment because they don't have to impress you. They need you to comfort them.
Yeah, so. That's exactly right. So just lean in those moments and be with them because it makes a big difference. But again, there's a lot of different things like that kind of play into this. And so we're talking about some blended family issues, just some hot topics, things that kind of come up often. We'll just fire through them real quick. One of them is structure of the family, which we kind of get into a little bit. Is if with Jamie's family, she has a son and a daughter. Her son was the oldest child in the group of siblings. So when you get into birth order, he was number one. And then my sons are both older. So he came in and he was
that much older. So they look like a sibling group.
Yeah. So he comes in and suddenly he's number three. And he has to try to instantly adapt to not having the same order and where things are. So there's a ton of little adjustments like that that kind of come in that can be really, really difficult in general. So just be aware when you're changing the whole dyad of everything, which is the marriage, you're changing everything that comes with it has to adjust as well.
Like these little microsystems of weather that are just you don't expect them to crop up, but all of a sudden they're there and there's a storm and you're like, what, whoa.
And we got through this, okay? And we weren't. So let me say, all right. And we got our education too. After that. So if you're sitting here thinking, well, they did, they're whatever they've, yeah. Well, we looked for ways and said, this is our gifts. What can we do consistently to help people, and and intersect with our gifts with a hurting world, and this is a great opportunity for us. So that's what we're all about. We don't care about anything else other than that. The other thing is rules. All the rules change. Those of you may know this already, but like if her kids can't watch a PG-13 movie, and my kids could watch R-rated movies, and they come in the house and it's movie time, mine are like, hey, let's turn this on, and she's like, oh, they can't watch that. And I'm like, no, you can't watch that movie. Like, Dad, we own that movie. You bought that movie. We can own that movie. I'm like, we don't watch that movie anymore. We don't watch that movie anymore, boy. Like, go to your room. Wait, your room has a TV. Go to my room. Go anywhere but here. But again, you have to have those things in mind because you have to kind of set the new structure and the new rules in the home so the game kind of changes. And the trick to that is really being unified, having those conversations away from the kids, and then coming together and saying, we are deciding to do this. Because if you said to the kids but they're too young. So they're going to resent their siblings for being there because it's changed their life. Now they can't do the things they're used to doing. So you've got to have that ability to kind of talk through together and then navigate that together and help them understand. And the trick to that is developing a lot of relationship with them, which we'll talk about in a minute. But
actually, the best rule to rules is relationship.
Yeah.
the best part of that.
100%.
Because that's what it's really about. You can apply rules all
Yeah.
day long, but without the relationship, they'll just be arbitrary.
Yeah, no, and that's really the trick here too. You got to have that connection. But yeah, those are really big things. And again, just also understand that your biological children will have a problem with the person you marry. Just know that. I've worked with dozens of couples. I've never seen that to be untrue. The reason for that is clear, is because they had uninterrupted time with you, whatever time they got with you, until you got married, and then now that's divided. And now there's somebody else in their world, and that person represents the finality of that divorce. It is now over. There's somebody else in here. So they have to deal with a lot of emotion connected to that. And my point behind that is don't, again, internalize that. It's not about, they don't dislike you. It's like if it were anybody else, they would have the same feeling because that's what it represents to them, somebody filling that role. And so now, over time that can adjust. The difficulty is in blended families, most blended families feel normal in 5 to 7 years. So if you're thinking in a year, everything's going to be like the Cleavers, you're going to have a very, very fun year and a couple more years after that. So if you set your pace a little bit differently and realize we need to just set long-term goals and trajectory here and make sure we're moving in the right direction, it'd be a little more realistic. But that makes a little bit of a difference there. But again, makes a big thing. So, but again, they have that loss of time. And remember, emotional triggers, are all about something bigger. It's not about the actual what happened. It's about something way bigger than that, and you'll see that happen.
I'd even say, remember, if you are the safe parent, which I'm going to just assume everyone here is the safe parent. So if you are the safe parent, then I'm talking in the divorce, so you're the safe parent, and now you've brought in someone else, just to kind of go back a little bit. How safe do they feel now that you have to introduce and impress somebody else? So now they're living in this impressive world. Well, if you don't think there's going to be some kind of backlash on that, just expect it. If you can change the expectation and just embrace that behavior, behavior is just a language. It's just communicating.
Yeah, and if you've been through it, some of these already, because it makes that big. It's a struggle with some of that. But there are other things that are really hot buttons, like finances. Where money is spent. I'm like, well, I want to spend all this on my son, and then it's like kids want to do this, and I don't think we have money for that. And it's like, well, wait a minute, so where money is spent, do we play with money or do we invest money? Suddenly, the changes on that make a difference. Living arrangements can be very difficult. Do you move into the house that one of you owns, where the other partner was with you? And then it's like, well, now is the family moving in, or are they just guests in the home of the kids that are already living there? Or do you go buy a new house together? I mean, all these little complications to talk through can really reduce some of the stressors and triggers, and as well as the child raising rules can make a big difference too. But yeah, you have all those type of things, and then you have the other person that's in the room. You have the non-residential parent. So now you have an additional parent involved, where if you have one Christmas, you have the kids, and they have Christmas Eve, and it rotates. Which Christmas do you guys want to travel? Well, one of you doesn't want to travel at all. Because it's like we have so suddenly now, well, how are we going to do this? We have to wait till they're 18 to do whatever. And so these are conversations you're going to have because of the way somebody else is involved in making that decision in some agreement that was made. And so those things can really complicate as well too. Having these conversations early make it a lot easier to navigate this. These are not things that can't be navigated. It is just very, very hard, and time is another one, not being second fiddle. Not being like, who comes first, the kids on this or the wife or her kids, his kids, all of that. So those things can all make a big difference in time. And remember, it's not really about time. It's about love and affection and importance. Who's more important?
It's intentionality in that space.
Yeah, and that's the trick of it, is really being intentional. That you can kind of have to set that up. But you have to have the boundaries with the non-residential parents, and you have to come up together with how those boundaries kind of work, which is we coach people in that a lot, so it's a whole personal conversation on that. Let's talk about pace, though, real quick. I mentioned 5 to 7 years. The kids who have it the hardest, some of you have asked about this, the kids who have it the hardest are 10 to 14-year-olds. 10 to 14-year-olds have the most difficult time in a blended family situation. The older ones are underinvested. They're thinking, well, I don't care, I'm not going to be here. So they're not really, by the time you're talking 7 years, they're like, I'll be gone. So they just don't really feel like they need to make the investment, and they don't need as much parenting. 10 to 14-year-olds need hands on deck, And that's not the role of a step parent, which we'll get into in a second here. But under 10, more accepting of a new adult, much easier to do as well. But, and I kind of touched on it, but just so you know, the role of the step parent is think camp counselor. If you think like camp counselor, you're going to nail it. Okay, like your role is to develop a relationship with them and be that mentor in their life. It is not to discipline them. Biological parents discipline biological kids. You have to build that bond with them before you can do that. And if you step in, which means mom and dad, you got to have talk about expectations. Because the first time a son says, I hate you, you're a this, mom. And dad's like, I'm going to handle this. And you're like, you're going to step in because you think that's what I'm supposed to do. Well, in a biological family, that might be how it was handled. But in this situation, that's not the way it's handled. And if mom's expecting you to intervene, then what's going to happen is, honestly, is you're going to intervene and you're going to catch it from mom. But that's okay. If you want to try that, you go for it. But if you do that intervention on it, and then what you're going to have is you have this problem with that. So the role of the step parent is to reduce the conflict with the non-biological kids by having developing a relationship with them. And once you have a relationship with them, you're going to be able to speak into it. A relationship is a bridge into someone's life. The stronger that bridge, the more weight it can carry. Think about your best friend. You can tell your best friend anything, and then there's certain people you can't tell. There's certain secrets you keep because you just don't talk about things with people at work, their coworkers. So the more relationship you have, the more you can kind of have that connection, and that's the goal of the step parent, because you're going to need that down the road. So again, don't force that, and don't force the titles stepmom, dad, all that kind of stuff. That's got to be more organic.
They'll come naturally and they'll change. So
Yeah.
there's a really good chance that they'll change, especially just depending on the age of the children, and as well as and don't internalize that, because just don't internalize that, because it will change, and you may question what happened, but it's just let it roll.
Yeah. I do want to share a verse with you. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but because I kind of wanted to share a lot of other things, but this is kind of important. Have grace for each other. I mean, you're both going to miss it. Nobody is trying to sabotage. Your partner's not trying to ruin anything. They're trying to navigate very complex things the best they can. The more grace you can give, the better. But 1 Corinthians 2, 7-11, an amplified version, Paul's telling people in the church there how to respond to like sinners and people that are massively causing division, not spouses. We're talking about like way distant. But this is what he says to the stranger who's really mean that you just hate. This is what he says to him. Again, not to the loved ones. So we should be doing probably a lot more than this. But he said, if someone causes you sorrow, and then it goes on to verse 7, instead of further rebuking them, which I don't know how many of y'all like to further rebuke, But okay, well, we'll move on. Let's move on. You should rather graciously forgive and comfort and encourage him. I urge you to reinstate him in your affections and reaffirm your love for him. For this purpose, with my writing, to see if you would stand the test, whether you are obedient and committed to follow my instructions and all these things. If you forgive anyone of anything, I forgive you too, and that I've forgiven you, and I've forgiven anything for your sake, in the presence of this land of Christ, to keep Satan from taking advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his schemes. And what's interesting here is your spouse hurts you if you apply this right. It's forgive, comfort, encourage. And it's not so anything, it's for them, for their good. For their own good, take that position, and we are urged to reinstate that affection. And again, intentionally declare that affection. But it's interesting, the word, when it gets into to reaffirm your love, it's not a transactional love. It's not, if you do for me, then I love you. And if you're going to treat mine that way, then I'm going to treat you this way. It's not this way of control. It's really more of this non-transactional, no matter how you are, I love you how you are, leaning in. To ratify your love is a legal term in the Greek. To enforce, to validate, or to really ratify a contract. You are enacting a contract in that moment of love. And we're not talking about a marriage. We're talking about strangers. Okay? You're enacting a contract and saying, not because you feel it. If you felt it, you don't need a contract. If you want to give somebody money for a car, you're like, this car's worth every penny. Let me just write you a check. You don't need a contract. You can just give money. But in this case, we're ratifying it. Why? The reason why is to keep the devil from taking advantage of us or exploiting our weaknesses. There are a lot of weaknesses that can be exploited in a blended family. And we, the innocent person, letting go of these hurts, not dying on that hill, letting go of these offenses is the way that we stop the enemy from exploiting the weaknesses of the situation we're in each of our humanity in our families. So this is a powerful tool to take your family in the right direction, but it goes against what a lot of what you're thinking you'd want to do.
It'll go against every emotion.
Yeah. So again, let's get into some of these questions, though. I really want to get into the questions a little bit. You guys asked a little bit how to create boundaries in blended families when others are not on the same page spiritually. They're not on the same page. How do you set boundaries? You can't control the other family. You can only control yours. Like Joshua, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. You can try to be very kind in communication and listen to their concerns and try to express values, but you can't just control the other person or try to manipulate them into doing different things. In as far as like making kids go to church or honoring your spiritual values if the other family or the other home won't. So that can be a tricky thing, but
well, you have to think about the outcome. So again, back to vision. You have to think about the outcome. What is the outcome going to be here? If we're creating all of this tension between biologic mom and dad, what is that going to be? And when it's about church or about whatever your practices are. So me and my house. Mm-hmm. And that's where it comes in and then you're also creating all of this extra stress and tension in your life. And I can talk about the biology of that, how unhealthy that is for you. Like that's, and biblically,
definitely.
Biblically, it'll lead you right to, that's not ours. You can't control another human. They have to make their independent decision. And the more tension you build in between that parent over Christianity or over your faith issues is creating tension and faith issues. So,
and I would say too, again, your partner's trying to navigate the best they can. So if they're messing up or something, keep in mind, you can be right or you can be together. Make sure you're leaning in together and walking with them in that. But even just kind of quickly, just going over, parenting styles being different between mom and dad. Keep in mind that you both probably have the same goal. It's just the way to deliver that goal can be very different. Talking about those things is good when you're not elevated in the moment. Talking about it when it's easy, have those conversations. Know your triggers, know your history. Compromise when you can, and really watch your expectations and say, okay, let's win the long game here and not the short game.
I would say educate yourself as to what is happening in the lives of the children and what is if you're not really sure what the goal is, then it's a worthless conversation. It's a worthless argument. It's a worthless boundary, really, if you're not sure of the why. So if you can't educate that to your children and you're not educated of it, then
and I would say win the war here. Don't be reactive, respond. And what I mean by that, and we'll close with this, is that understand that for us, we have State of the Union meetings, and we'll sit down and we will just pick a time that's a Pepper's time and say, hey, we need to talk about how we're going to handle this in the future. In the moment when people are elevated, your heart rate's above 100, you're elevated, the part of your brain that makes good decisions is dead. It's not working. It's just not functioning. Only the amygdala. So that's when people say stuff they don't mean. You're getting hostile. Everything communicates. So a slamming door means I don't feel heard. I mean, everything is communicating. So when it's elevated, you guys need to back away and say, hey, this is too important to talk about while we're heated. Let's talk about this a little bit later. Come back together when the best part of your brain's working, get some advice, get some mentors around you, formulate the best plan and win the war, even if it feels like you're losing the battle.
Sharon's got a question for you.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Obviously, a marriage has fallen apart. It's earth-shattering. Right?
Yeah.
How do you build trust again? How do you walk that out? How do you go, okay, I'm prepared to not just marry you, but really trust you. I'm throwing my whole self into this.
You want to start or you want me to start?
Boy, that's a can of worms. That's a whole another 45 minutes, at least. Vulnerability. That's the one word that comes to my mind. And vulnerability is a really interesting word, but you have to be willing to feel pain. to be vulnerable. So you have to, and it's small baby steps in time,
Yeah.
and it's intentional actions and even expression. So, telling him, hey, this is a vulnerable space, and this is an opportunity for you to build trust. So again,
Right.
I think so often in life we roll through life so fast, thing after thing, especially in a family. It's fast paced. We have 4 children, so there's things that are always happening that sometimes you don't take that step back and do a little bit of introspection and go, where are we, and then where are we as a family? And so then you have to find that space to trust, because you'll be reactive if you are not trusting.
Yeah, and I would add to that too. You've got to be healed in that level. And what I mean by that is, in all the domains, like have connection spiritually, connection with friends, connection with family. It's like a wagon wheel with spokes. It can't just be marriage and now I'm devastated and now I need another relationship. Develop healthy relationships, a healthy life all the way around. Develop your strengths, and then it puts less weight on it. Because think of it like a bone that's healing. What do you do? If you stayed in a cast all the time, you'd be safer, but you would never have function of your ankle or leg or whatever. And so it's the same kind of thing. Like Jamie said, there's vulnerability and risk. If you want to be safe, be single. Don't love anything you won't have loss. You'll be good. But if you I don't want to live that way, then there is risk. But take safe, small risks with people who are safe. The first sign you see of not being safe, talk through some of that, get around a lot of wisdom, get around other people who see things clearly, and make a very calculated decision on whether that will be. It's like stepping on ice. If you ever lived out in the Midwest or out north, you're like, is it going to crack? Will it hold my weight? You don't just jump on it. Well, some people do, but you just kind of step on it a little bit, just see if it'll hold. And that's kind of, what you do kind of moving forward.